Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. 2016 has brought us up to a new presidential race, which seems to be a contention between Hillary Rodham Clinton and, of course, Donald Trump, the real estate mogul. The question is on the table, which one of them is going to bring the best promising job creation? On the one hand, Mrs. Clinton is proposing a huge program to rebuild the country's infrastructure, which could include ports, highways, railroads, and other public facilities. 10 million jobs is estimated to be created, so she promises. On the other hand, Donald Trump is promising job creation not by a federal works program, but through enacting tax incentives, which he believes will lure back thousands of U.S. businesses and millions of jobs which have fled to foreign countries over the past 2 decades. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who will tell us how our next president will create good-paying jobs. Our currency expert, Andrew Goss. Andrew, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, talking about jobs, you hear the same thing over and over and over again, and you kind of wonder who really has the best wand when it comes to solving this problem here. Kind of give us some insight on all this and what's going on here.
Well, it seems simple enough, and I guess before I begin, I want to make myself clear. I'm not a Trump surrogate by any means, but I do think his economic plan is better. So, if you're with the other candidate, my apologies, but here we go. So, you could create your own job, I suppose, if you wanted to. Give yourself a job painting your house or mowing your lawn or, cleaning up around the place. Probably needs it. But the thing is, you'd be paying yourself. And the work would be less than productive. So Ms. Clinton's plan, while noble, certainly we need our infrastructure rebuilt. She wants to create $500 million in new debt on top of the existing budget deficit, which is another $500 million, and then use all of that money to, use all of that money to rebuild our infrastructure, our ports, our bridges, our airports, and so forth. And certainly that will put people to work. But at the end of the day, will the result pay for itself? And over the very, very long term, it will. But over the short term, it will cost. And so that means you need additional tax revenues. Where do you get them from? Well, presumably you'll be taking a little bit of those folks' paychecks in taxes, so that'll be an additional tax paid. And you'll spread the burden to the rest of us with, what she promises are higher taxes on I'm using my air quotes, the rich. So, unfortunately, the rich seems to be anybody with a job these days because it seems that the tax increases are aimed squarely at the middle. So that is one option. Tax yourself and then use that money to pay for internal improvements, nothing that's very productive. What has happened is really what we should be looking at. We've raised the corporate tax rate to somewhere around 40%, probably one of the highest in the world. And so, as a result, companies like Ireland, whose corporate tax rate may be in the 12.5% range, have seen companies pick up their headquarters and all of their good-paying jobs and move to Ireland, where they only have to pay a 12.5% tax rate. And they don't repatriate the money, they just keep it offshore, never bring it back into the United States. And any accountant can justify the cost of this simply by, running a few numbers for a corporation. And I don't have to preach. We don't call it the Rust Belt for nothing. There's a reason that all of our factories are gone, all of our manufacturing jobs are gone, and then all of the small businesses that come up around these things, all of the little diners and the shoe shops and the shoe repair place and the barber and, everybody, and all of the taxes they pay. So Mr. Trump's logic is simple. I think it makes it brilliant, really. So if you cut the corporate tax rate back down to 15%, then new corporations will come back to the United States, bring their jobs with them, employ hundreds of thousands of people, and then those folks will, of course, find themselves paying taxes to broaden the base. And the small businesses that erupt around the factories and the headquarters will also employ people who will pay additional taxes. So Mr. Trump's plan of broadening the base to draw jobs back to America rather than sacrifice them to foreign countries in the name of global détente. I don't see the logic in that plan. It's been a failure over 30 years. I remember Ross Perot and the giant sucking sound. So That's the nuts and bolts of Mr. Trump's plan as it relates to creating jobs.
Now, one of the things that you hear continuously, especially in a campaign, is talking about unemployment and how, well, I did this and it reduced the unemployment rate or increased the employment rate, however you want to look at it here. And it's really interesting when you take a look at the real numbers as to where they're actually drawing these things from. Tell us about the math. It seems a little confusing.
Well, if you take an average family, let's take a typical family, husband, wife, let's say a 17-year-old child and a 8-year-old child and maybe a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old child. So obviously the young children are not participating in the workforce, right? So that the thing that you may hear quoted now and then is the worker participation rate. And our worker participation rate, well, wait, let's go a step further with the family to help understand the number. The other three work, husband, wife, and oldest son. And all of a sudden, oldest son loses job, but he's out looking for a job. So he's participating in the workforce. Even though he doesn't have a job, he's looking for one. The two young children will never participate in the workforce until they reach the right age, which is younger and younger these days. So, at any rate, when you look at the workforce of the United States as a whole, our worker participation rate is as low as it has ever been, somewhere down in the 62% range. So, fully 38% of our population is not engaged in working or looking for a job. But of the 62% or so that are, only 5% of those are unemployed. So this is how the numbers can be skewed. And I wrote a book in 2003 called Uncle Sam Cooks the Books, and that's just one of them an example. So when you're told we have a 5% unemployment rate, in reality, if you factored in the non-worker participants, and they're not just kids, incidentally, these or older retired folks, these are people who have just become so discouraged when the only job you can find pays less than your public benefits might. Why go to work? Why risk your life on a roof when you can collect an equivalent amount of money by not working at all? So we don't, again, just like our corporate tax structure, we don't encourage people to work. We just tell them that it's more if it's more profitable to stay home, then you just go ahead and stay on the dole.
Yeah, crazy stuff. Now, give us an idea, for instance, how many U.S. businesses have closed their doors and moved, let's say, to Mexico, China, Japan, and the like.
Well, the numbers are startling. We've lost 5 million factory jobs in the last 20 years. 5 million factory jobs. So what else is there to say, If you remember in the Rust Belt or the Midwest, there was a time when a young man or woman could come out of high school with a high school education and go to work at a local factory producing some item, and that item, of course, made its way into the domestic marketplace, made in USA. That's just not the case anymore. The only thing we have now are warehouse and distribution jobs, and unloading the stuff from China. Meanwhile, China's building the new airports and the new bridges and the new dams and all the new technology. Why? Well, because all of that revenue flowing into these jobs, these are high-paying manufacturing jobs. And the thing that bothers me the worst about it all is most times legislation comes down to us from lobbying groups and organizations that support candidates. So they give us rules, and it's always proposed by the lobbies, the corporations, and things of that nature. People rarely get together and petition for things. But we did in the 70s and the 50s and the 60s. We petitioned for worker safety, for better work rules, for living wages, for mandatory work weeks, for overtime pay, for health and benefits, and for environmental causes. You can't pollute the environment. You have to keep everything clean. You have to keep a safe workplace. And all of these regulations, of course, cost money for businesses. Now, I'm not saying to eliminate them because those are hard-won gains. But if you tell a corporation you have to do all that stuff, if you're going to create a job and manufacture your goods right here, you have to do all that stuff. But if you pick up this factory and move it to India, You can bring your goods back in the United States with no tax, no tariff, and you can keep your cash offshore so that it's not taxed in the United States. Now, you tell me, if you were a corporation, what would you do? And it's exactly what they did. So not only did we lose all the jobs, but you don't think they're polluting the environment on the other side of the world and exploiting workers? Of course they are. And so we've given up not only our gains in terms of profitability for the average worker, but we've given up all the environmental gains that we've made as other countries are allowed to induce the pollution and the bad worker relations that we fought to get rid of in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Now, you take a look at, for instance, Wall Street seems to be doing pretty well. But yet, we're doing pretty poorly, so it seems. Let's talk about that a little bit.
I can explain that. Yeah. Well, because it's simple. So when you have, first of all, the Federal Reserve banks, which create the money, are owned by the banks that they regulate. It's a curious system, independent. And we've only been using it since 1913. But what it means is that the banks and the banking entities have an ungodly amount of influence over government. And so when we go to Korea and we strike a deal with Korea okay, we're going to let you sell 50,000 cars in the United States. Here's what we want. We want the right to bank. We want the right to set up a bank in your country and to underwrite your securities and to loan money to your businesses and your people and to gather deposits from your citizens. So that's what we trade our manufacturing jobs for. So they say, okay, we want to sell the cars. Well, then you just have to let our banks in. And they do. So as a result, now you have Bank of America and Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo and others. These are all the primary owners of the Federal Reserve banks. They have been engaged in mega job creation in the banking industry. But just 500 banking jobs versus 50,000 manufacturing jobs, how long can you keep that up? Well, that's essentially what we've done. And yes, it takes more well-educated people to do those jobs, and perhaps the top 2 or 3% of folks. But what about the other 97% of Americans? They need jobs too. So we cannot make all of our children into bankers. The Japanese had an old saying, I loved it, is that we make things, from the 80s. We make things, and Americans play with money. So that's all we ever want, is to set up a bank in your country, and in exchange, you can make everything you want to make and give it to us. And it really harkens back to that old maxim, since the Federal Reserve Bank creates dollars, right? It was Mayor Amschel Rothschild back in the 1740s that said, give me the power to coin a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws. Boy, that couldn't be more true than it is today. It's all of our laws are skewed towards favoring banks and to the detriment of the typical American taxpayer.
Well, we certainly hear a lot of complaining when it comes to that about what we can do about the banks and how that's all been working out. And another thing, too, that sounds very American but apparently hasn't worked very well is that of free trade. What is that all about?
Well, the idea that we'll sell you our goods free of tax and you sell us your goods free of tax, that's how this has all been. See, our nation was built on tariffs. And people don't even understand what a tariff is, I don't think. But a tariff is when a good is imported into this country, a tax is added right to the top of the value of the good and paid into the Treasury of the United States. Historically, this has been used to protect domestic industry. So let's say you have a shoe manufacturer in New Hampshire and somebody wants to import shoes from Brazil, and you say to them, no, you can't do that because you don't have the same environmental and worker safety and all those rules we talked about. So you have to pay a tax on top of it before you can sell your shoes in the United States. And so then that makes them competitive, at least. It gives the factory in New Hampshire a fighting chance. Well, everyone around the world was protectionist at one time, and it made trade very difficult. So in order to balance the field or level the playing field, this idea was proposed, and it's a bit of a libertarian view, a bit of an Adam Smith view. Whoever you want to look at in economics, the free hand of the market should decide where goods are made. But that throws away regulation and all the things that we conveniently value, like a clean environment and a safe workplace. So, because companies will throw all that out the window in the name of profit, we should understand that. And in foreign countries where these laws are easily bypassed, they have a definite competitive advantage over the United States. So when we drop all of our tariffs as the #1 marketplace in the world and say you can bring your goods here in the United States and freely sell them, no tax, we'll pay for the ports, the shipping facilities, security, we'll even give you the money system to pay for it with, and is no charge to you. It doesn't make sense to a lot of folks, and what has happened as a result is the jobs have left the United States and the foreign goods have poured in. And of course, countries around the world have expanded and really exploded as they benefit from this, but we in the United States have watched our standard of living just circle the drain. So it is a problem, and tariffs have a way of leveling the playing field back for us. Now, many will say, and this is true, is what happens. If you think we have free trade, I have a friend in South America who imported a Dodge Durango into that country, a used one. His engine blew. He said to me, hey, send me a crate motor. A 100% tariff on imported engine parts in South America. I have a client who's a chicken producer in the South. He has chicken feet, which are completely worthless in the American marketplace, but absolutely favored in China. They put together these chicken feet in frozen containers, ship them to China, 130% tax on imported poultry parts. So we drop, okay, well, you can do that to us, but we're still going to be nice. That's not the American way. American steel producers had to actually sue the Chinese in order to get them into the court of international court for settlements because the administration refused to enforce our own trade agreement, the one that we had. So it's a hard row to plow for the American manufacturer, no question about it, and the idea of free trade is not free at all. It seems to be that we're the only ones that live up to our part of the bargain. We make horrible deals to begin with, like the 500 banking jobs for the 50,000 manufacturing jobs, and then we wonder why we wind up with this result, and we keep doing it over and over and over again. So between NAFTA and GATT and now the new TPP, we have just traded ourselves out of employment. And unless we redo these trade deals, this trend will continue in the future.
Now, during this campaign season, a lot of times we're not made aware of certain things, and one of those could be the other issues that affect jobs. Tell us what we should be more aware of when it comes to job growth here in the U.S. during this season.
Well, I mean, it is, in fact, what do we call it? Natural economics, natural law. The idea of farming, fishing, mining, and manufacturing. Those are the ways you create wealth. You start with nothing and you make something. You can't just pass things from hand to hand and expect to support an entire country economy the size of the U.S. So our gross domestic product is based on that last word, product, productivity. So if we have a nation that's built on, we create jobs for people painting the house, that's not very productive. Yeah, it's nice to have a smooth road that we can ride on. However, what did it do to create additional jobs? And the answer is nothing. What did it do to broaden the tax base? Nothing. In fact, when you're done building the road, then what do you do with these 10 million jobs, these 10 million workers who know how to build roads? So it is not a sustainable path, as the environmentalists like to say. And we need to think about expanding our manufacturing base and expanding our technical training for our young people. I think a national service corps is definitely in order at this turn.
This is also eye-opening at the same time. There seems to be a lot of common sense that comes into this. And, and I understand that you were on record for saying that economic uncertainties in the European Union, especially the EU banking system, could have an impact not only on jobs here in the U.S., but on the entire U.S. economy. Is there a strategy that we can come to know about that could protect ourselves from these uncertainties?
Well, Article 1 of the Constitution is a good place. I mean, we don't seem to use it much anymore, but for me, the founders knew all about paper money. They knew all about banks of issue, banks that create money. They knew all about it. In fact, they enclosed in Article 1 of the Constitution, not an amendment, Article 1, the first thing, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender and payment of debt. So because our money system is based on nothing, it's based on air, it's based on debt, in fact. The only way money comes into circulation now is not through productivity. I just dug some gold up and had it struck into a coin, but through an issuance of a debt instrument. So if somebody says, I owe you $1,000, the Federal Reserve banks create $1,000 and give it to that person and use the debt instrument as the backing. So our entire money system is backed by debt. So every dollar that you own is someone else's risk. What they call counterparty risk. Somebody owes you $1. You don't have $1. You have a note or a representation that someone owes it to you. And if they can't pay it, you're in trouble unless they create more and pay it that way. So that's why our forefathers used that very specific phrase. Now, I know here in New Jersey they have us convinced the right to bear arms means you can wear a short-sleeve shirt, but no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender and payment of debt. I don't see how you could misinterpret that clause.
Yeah, and it tells a lot of Americans, too, how much more proactive we have to get involved with this system if we want to see it begin to work again. And I'm kind of curious now, do you have a website people can go and find out more about this?
Okay, so my commentary side, if you will, not affiliated with the company I work for, is andygause.com, GAUSE.com. The side that I work for, the commercial side, if you will, is SDL Incorporated. They are usgoldcoins.com. And naturally, with my beliefs, who else would I throw myself in with but a company that buys and sells American gold and silver coins. So that's the firm I work for. If you're interested in the commercial side of this, usgoldcoins.com, if you just want to learn more, which I urge Americans to do, and I thank SDL because they sponsor a free audio CD giveaway that I make. There's 3 audio CDs. One is called The Federal Reserve. It explains all about that institution, how it works, and what it isn't. The other is the definition of money. What is $1? Unless you know, how can you save them? And the third, Protecting Your Wealth, probably the most popular of the 3, tells you what to do about it. You can get all 3 of these free, courtesy of SDL or usgoldcoins.com, by calling 800-468-2646. Now, these are good people. You won't get any high-pressure sales pitch to buy coins, believe me. You can have all the education you want, and the rest of it won't follow. So 800-468-2646. To the extent that you want to learn about the monetary system, they're more than willing to teach you.
Well, like they said, ignorance may be bliss, but it's also painful, too. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Well, I want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50, where you'll find our website and also the opportunity to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter. Keep you up to date what's going on Beyond 50 and upcoming shows as well. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Beyond 50 Radio as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.